welcome to the lecture series on Introduction to Indian Philosophy. Today I'll introduce you to the Sāṃkhya school of Indian philosophy. This orthodox school is considered as the oldest of all the Indian philosophical schools. The influence of Sāṃkhya philosophy on the ancient Indian literary texts is remarkable. The ideas and the terms that we encounter while studying this system are found in abundance in the Rig Veda, the Upanishads, particularly the Katha and the Shvetashvatar, the Mahabharata, as well as in the Puranas. In the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, the Anugita of the Ashvamedhika Parvan and the Moksha Dharma section of the Shanti Parvan are pervaded with the references to the Sāṃkhya philosophy. The founder of the Sāṃkhya system is sage Kapila. The historians haven't been able to trace the time period of sage Kapila. So, as they say, his memory survives only in his system. Some believe that there were two people by the same name. One, the Vedic sage Kapila, who was a theist, and the other, an atheist philosopher who probably influenced Gautam Buddha, and also after whose name the birthplace of Buddha, which is Kapilavastu, was named. So, we have probably two Kapila belonging to totally different and distant time periods. Now, the sage Kapila, who is mentioned in the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, the Puranas, is the founder of the theistic Sāṃkhya school. Unfortunately, none of his original works have survived. According to the tradition, he authored an influential sutra called the Sāṃkhya Sutra, which contains the dualistic philosophy of Sāṃkhya. Taking further cue from the tradition, Asuri was sage Kapila's disciple. He actually belonged to the Ajivika sect, which, if you remember, is one of the sects among the Shramana movement. And therefore, he was a promoter of the materialist thought. Now, Asuri was the teacher of Panchashikha, who perhaps had received some sort of ideas from his teacher. Strangely, the only extant work that we have of this system is Sāṃkhya Karika of Ishwar Krishna, which suggests the Sāṃkhya system to be atheistic. So, those who are interested in knowing about the system have to depend only on the Sāṃkhya Karika of Ishwar Krishna. But as we know that the Sanskrit word Karika means an explanatory work, and therefore Karikas mean explanatory verses. They are for sure explanations of some work that was the original Sāṃkhya work, maybe of sage Kapila himself or of Asuri's atheistic influence added to it. Whatever it is, we cannot deny the contribution of sage Kapila to Sāṃkhya philosophy, as there are countless works that corroborate his role in laying the foundation of this system. I wish to mention the reference of sage Kapila in the Bhagavad Gita, where Sri Krishna says, Ashvatthah sarva vrikshanam Devarshinam cha Naradah Gandharvanam Chitrarathah Siddhanam Kapilo Muni. Which means, of all trees, I am the Ashvatha or the banyan tree, and of the divine seers, I am Narada. Among the Gandharvas, I am Chitraratha, and of the perfected beings, I am the sage Kapila. There is a great mystery and so many stories weaved around sage Kapila that it becomes impossible to dissociate him from the Sāṃkhya system as well as the Hindu religion. The Puranas refer to Kapila as an incarnation of Vishnu who descended on earth to disseminate knowledge. Nat Jacobson, in his research work titled Kapila, founder of Sāṃkhya and avatar of Vishnu, with a translation of Kapilasuri Samvada published in 2008, claims that the Kapila of the Vedas, the Shramana movement and the Mahabharata is the same. He is the founder of the Sāṃkhya. He is the incarnation of Vishnu. And if you read the Ramayana, you will find a story of the 60,000 sons of Sagara, the king of Ayodhya. They were instructed by their father to go in search of a horse of the Ashwamedha sacrifice, as it was stolen by a demon. Their search was completed on seeing the horse near the place where sage Kapila was meditating. So they accused him of stealing the horse, and this accusation enraged the sage so much that he reduced them all to ashes. So this was the story about the sage. Now the Sāṃkhya system proclaimed by sage Kapila cannot be regarded as completely atheistic, because although he was against the ritualistic practices ordained in the Vedas, he did acknowledge the authority of revelation as central to reasoning as well as experience. He did allow verbal testimony as a praman, which corroborate his belief in the divine origin and authority of the Vedas. Shankaracharya, however, in his commentary on the Brahma Sutras, has remarked that Kapila's system is at variance with the Veda and with the words of Manu, who follows the Veda, not only in supposing an independent Prakriti, but also in supposing a diversity of souls. So perhaps we can say that sage Kapila was a Brahmin who, displeased with the prevailing ritualistic practices and beliefs of his times, propounded a system to unfold and explain the mysteries related to the conscious and the unconscious principles with the help of reason alone. Now, the yoga philosophy of Patanjali is studied in combination with the Sāṃkhya school. They are, in fact, considered one in the Bhagavad Gita. This is because the Sāṃkhya metaphysics and epistemology were accepted by the yoga school, and the practice of meditation explained by the yoga system to attain Viveka Gnana, which is discrimination between self and non-self, which ultimately leads to liberation, was accepted by the Sāṃkhya school. One thing is certain: had this Sāṃkhya philosophy of Kapila acquired a universal acceptance, it would have been as damaging to the Vedanta school of thought as was Buddha's philosophy. In both the Sāṃkhya as well as Buddhism, ritualistic practices were taken over by knowledge and meditation. Unfortunately, sage Kapila did not establish any order. Perhaps his interaction with common people too was extremely limited. So, his rich philosophy did not gain much prominence apart from the references that are found in the ancient literary texts. It was never embodied and crystallized in a concrete form, and as a complete system, it has been preserved only as an intellectual product or as an esoteric doctrine understood and accepted by a smaller inner circle of free thinking men. Anyway, I will go with the general practice of explaining the Sāṃkhya philosophy through the views of Ishwar Krishna, who represents the atheistic version of the system, because, as I mentioned, his is the only authoritative work on Sāṃkhya which is available. In fact, many ancient philosophers have written commentaries on his work, Sāṃkhya Karika, like Gaudapada, who wrote Sāṃkhya Karika Bhashya, Vijnana Bhikshu wrote Sāṃkhya Pravachana Bhashya, and Vachaspati wrote Sāṃkhya Tattva Kaumudi. However, the actual time of Ishwar Krishna is unknown, because according to some books he belonged to the 3rd century CE, and according to some other books he belonged to the 5th century CE. The Sāṃkhya Karika consists of 72 verses, and each verse expresses a definite principle. The Karika is written in the Arya or Gatha meter. Anyway, let us first understand the word Sāṃkhya. It is derived from the word Sāṃkhya, which means number. So, it is philosophy of numbers. Why? Because it deals with 25 categories of reality and ultimately reduces them into only two: Purusha, or the conscious principle, and Prakriti, or the unconscious principle. And which is why it is called a dualistic school, as these two categories, that is Purusha and Prakriti, are ultimate entities and neither can be derived from the other. The system remains silent as far as the concept of God is concerned. However, there is plurality of Purushas. So we can call the Sāṃkhya philosophy as pluralistic spiritualism and an atheistic realism and an uncompromising dualism. But there is another translation of the word Sāṃkhya. If you notice, the verbal root khya means to know, and the prefix sam means exact. So the word Sāṃkhya also means exact knowledge, and Sāṃkhya means the philosophy of exact knowledge. Now, before moving on to discuss the main themes of the Sāṃkhya philosophy, which include the theory of causation, the concept of Prakriti, the concept of Purusha, the evolution of matter, the concept of liberation, and their theory of knowledge, I would like to discuss the need for studying the Sāṃkhya philosophy. We all know that it was Buddha who introduced us to the philosophy of suffering, as is explained in his Four Noble Truths. Nowhere in the Vedic literature the nature of the world is identified with suffering. However, if we notice the second noble truth, which is there is a cause of suffering, we realize that the nature of the world or of our life is not suffering. It is just coincidental. It has a beginning, and we know that whatever has a beginning cannot be equated with the nature. Suffering has a beginning, but we can bring an end to it by following a certain discipline and attaining exact knowledge. The Sāṃkhya Karika, therefore, begins with the problem of suffering in the world. The first verse itself expresses the concern of sage Kapila to relieve mankind from suffering. And the verse is: Dukkha traya abhighatat jignasa tat abhighatake hetau drashte sa apartha chet na ekanta atyantatah abhavat. Which means from the torment caused by the three kinds of pain proceeds a desire for inquiry into the means of terminating them. if it be said that the inquiry is superfluous, since visible means exist, we reply, not so, because in the visible means there is the absence of certainty and permanency. Let us understand what this means. Ishwar Krishna lists 3 ways in which suffering can visit a person. Number 1 is Adhyatmika, that is the natural and intrinsic, both bodily and mental. Bodily pain includes fevers and festering sores and more horrors like leprosy, cancer, etc. Mental pain is to be united with what we hate and separated from what we love. Number 2 is Adhibhautika, that is the natural and extrinsic, such as one man stabbing another, or a dog biting a man, or a landmine blowing someone's leg off, or someone striking his head against a wall accidentally. And there is the third, which is Adhidaivika, that is the divine or supernatural. This could be anything ranging from continuing bad luck to a sunstroke to a natural calamity like an earthquake or being possessed by an evil spirit. Now the question is, do we need the philosophy of Sāṃkhya as a means of eradicating suffering? Because this classification is obviously out of tune with what we know today. But that is not the point. What is on the anvil is the central idea that there is suffering and it has to be removed, for it is unendurable. So, the most obvious way of removal of bodily pains is medicine. Mental suffering can cease with the reversal of circumstances, that is, proximity of what is beloved and separation from the tormenting factors. Extrinsic causes of misery can be curtailed by due measures of safety. Divinities can be propitiated, or one can wear stones to avoid their baleful influence. But these measures, Ishwar Krishna points out, do not work out satisfactorily, for they don't eradicate suffering exhaustively and permanently. Now, what does Ishwar Krishna mean by removing suffering exhaustively and permanently? Because to the modern ear, such a remedy would be saying something like, the only way to exhaustively and permanently do away with toothaches is to make the human race somehow toothless. Ishwar Krishna surely did not mean this kind of exhaustive eradication of suffering. Now, the second way of removing suffering is even more radical, which implies if common restoratives do not work, then rituals surely will. There are a host of ritualistic rites which remove the 3 kinds of suffering permanently. So, the Vedic rituals, if performed diligently, shall send suffering packing and us to heaven, because heaven or Swarga, as explained in the Tantra Vartika, is that happiness which is endless and continuous and unmixed with unhappiness and is attained by intense longing for it. The Vedic rituals are therefore much easier than reading Sāṃkhya philosophy. But Ishwar Krishna clearly states in the 2nd verse of his Sāṃkhya Karika that Drishtavat anu shravikaha saha hi avishuddhi shaya atishaya yuktaha tat viparitah shreyan vyaktaha avyaktagya vijnanat, which means the scriptural means is like the obvious means, since it is linked with impurity, decay and excess. This means contrary to both and proceeding from the discriminative knowledge of the manifest, the unmanifest, and the spirit is superior. Now, in the judgment of Ishwar Krishna, the scriptural balm is also not perfectly efficient, for it is number 1, impure, 2, connected with decay or destruction, and 3, excessive or unequal. It is impure because in conducting Vedic rituals, a lot of animals must be killed, and this is a sin. So, in making certain a little bit of joy in our present existence, we are condemning ourselves to frightful punishment in the future. And he also says it is connected with decay and destruction. Because for how long can the effects of a ritual last? The performance of Vedic rituals do not give that final exemption from all material conditions, which means after a period of time, this destruction and renewal of bodily life will continue to happen. Then it is excessive or unequal, because all men cannot afford expensive rituals. Also, one ritual can always be found to be replaceable by some other. So, since neither restoratives nor rituals work in cutting the roots of misery, what can then do the needful task? Ishwar Krishna's answer is discriminative knowledge or ratiocination, which treats existence in 3 forms: the manifest or vyakta, the unmanifest or primal matter called prakriti or pradhana, which is avyakta, and the spirit or the knowing soul or self, gya. By this, Ishwar Krishna doesn't mean that a patient racked by the plague will sit up beaming with joy upon knowing about these 3 forms. What he is asking us is to look above individual instances of suffering to the very existence of suffering that is tied to the existence of a human being. We have to search for a remedy of the universal suffering and not the particular instances of it. And this is possible when we know the nature of what is vyakta, avyakta, and gya, which stands witness to both. When we know the ultimate reality, as it is, our life shall be an eternal joy. So, to conclude, I would say, when we dwell on suffering, we grow numb, waste away in despair, and a sense of futility of all effort overpowers us. To overcome this situation and to soothe our stricken nerves, the Sāṃkhya philosophy is required. In telling us what is real, it releases us from the apparent world of suffering. With this thought, I will end this lecture. Thank you so much.